Hello, I'm Jen. Welcome back to my channel, Literary Love 123, where I like to combine my master's in English with my passion for the horror genre to talk about the books that I read. In today's video, I will be talking about the oppressive domestic sphere in Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper and Gemma Amor's The Once Yellow House. So after this quick intro, we'll come right back and talk about these two important works. First published in 1892, Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper follows the story of a woman who has recently given birth and has been diagnosed by her husband, who also happens to be a physician, with a slight nervous tendency, a hysterical condition. And if you don't know the roots of the word hysteria and hysterical, then be sure to look that up because that has connotations of misogyny all on its own. But as I mentioned, she has been prescribed this rest cure by her husband. She also has another doctor who is named in the text, and he also agrees with this idea of a rest cure, where she is to go away to this kind of summer home and do nothing but rest. She is not allowed to write, which is a creative outlet for her. And this is particularly chilling once you know it is written from the very real perspective of Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who herself was prescribed a rest cure and in her diaries says that it nearly cost her her life. So, this book has a lot to say about dismissing women's health issues, about patriarchy, and about misogyny in the medical field and in society. The other book I'm talking about is Gemma Amor's The Once Yellow House. This book is kind of difficult to explain, but you have this cult who resided in this house that was known as the Once Yellow House. Now, you have a woman named Kate who was in this cult, and she has discovered the location of the cult leader's wife by the name of Hope, and she is interviewing Hope, and a lot of the story is told through Hope's diaries in the same way that the Yellow Wallpaper has diary entries from the woman who is our narrator. So you see some similarities there. I want to give a little more background information on the Once Yellow House. It was first published in March of 2023. It is written by Gemma Amor. And I also want to mention that the cult that this book discusses is no longer around. It's not a spoiler to say that there was a destructive event that occurred, and there are very few survivors of that cult. Now, there are a lot of themes to unpack with both the Yellow Wallpaper and the Once Yellow House, but this video is going to be focused on similar themes and how these two stories relate to one another. The themes and symbolism that will be explored in this video are the themes of isolation and restriction, mental health and subjectivity, symbolism of the setting, including the houses themselves and the wallpaper and the color yellow. So let's start by, first of all, looking at the symbolism of the color yellow. Because of its dichotomous nature, yellow is a really interesting choice for both of these books. So let's talk about the color yellow. It can be associated with the sun, so that would mean joy, hope, light, right? But yellow is also associated with death and can represent cowardice, betrayal, that sallow kind of sinister undertone. So you've got the two juxtaposing ideas there of what yellow can represent. And we see that play out in both of the works that we're talking about today. So now let's look at the color symbolism of yellow and the wallpaper itself from each of the texts. So starting with Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, the following passage is the narrator's thoughts about the wallpaper when she first sees it in the room where she's going to be confined while she is enduring this rest cure. She has this to say about the wallpaper. I never saw a worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin. It is dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study. And when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. The color is repellent, almost revolting, a smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow turning sunlight. So, there again, you see sunlight mentioned, which is connected to the color yellow. But mostly in this passage, we see what yellow represents for the narrator and her steadily declining mental health as she is confined to this room. So, now let's look at a quote from the Once Yellow House, where Hope, in her diary entry, describes the wallpaper inside the Once Yellow House. The wallpaper, only in one room, thankfully. Vintage Gothic velour paper, thick and furry, uninspiring, repeating patterns, interrupted in ways that hurt your brain the longer you look at it. So again, you have this unraveling of a narrator as she is confined to this space. And the wallpaper comes to represent in both stories the decay not only of the wallpaper itself, but also of the mental health of the narrators as they are confined to these domestic spaces. In both the Yellow Wallpaper and the Once Yellow House, the narrators use diary entries to speak directly to the reader. For example, when writing in her diary and her husband John coming in, the narrator in the Yellow Wallpaper says things like, "There comes John, and I must put this away. He hates to see me write a word." And in the Once Yellow House, you have Hope in her diary writing as she and her husband Thomas are moving into the Once Yellow House. Thomas and I moved today. The weather was good for us, but the whole experience still felt like the setup for a poorly executed horror movie. The kind where you start yelling at the screen at the naive idiots buying a fixer-upper thinking it will somehow solve their marital issues. You also see through both of these diary entries the confinement that these women feel in their marriages and in their domestic spaces. Another example of this is even when Hope moves out and her husband is no longer in the picture, she lives in a home by the name of Tay Fair, which I looked up, and that translates to English as watch house. So even after she has moved on from her husband and this cult, the question remains, has she really moved on? No, because she's still being watched, right? People are looking for her. She still feels like she is confined to that space under scrutiny. And we see this also in the Yellow Wallpaper as the narrator begins to kind of wonder when she first sees the house where they're going to be staying. She wonders if the house is haunted, and she feels that the house itself has a sinister presence. And we see that playing out in both literal and figurative ways in both of these books, the way that domestic space has confined both of the narrators and has left them vulnerable to their husbands and other elements. The sinister nature of the domestic space in each of these works can further be seen through the narrators' recordings in their diaries. For example, in The Yellow Wallpaper, the narrator writes, "There is something strange about the house. I can feel it." And in the Once Yellow Wallpaper, the narrator writes, "I am starting to suspect there is something very wrong with this place, like reality is thinner here." She also writes about how she needs to escape from this house before it drives her mad. In each of these works, the woman narrator is ignored by her husband, is belittled by her husband to one degree or another when she tries to talk about her health. It is believed that the husband knows best what the wife needs. For example, in The Yellow Wallpaper, the wife is trying to tell the husband that perhaps going out for the day may help her, perhaps doing some writing may help her, and she is always just overridden by her husband's so called knowledge about what she really needs. There's even parts where he talks about she, needs to get better for him and for the baby. So, again, putting that pressure on her that it's all about how she, as a wife and mother, can make his life better, not about what she needs to make her life better, what she needs indeed in order to even continue to stay alive. Something similar happens in the Once Yellow House, where Hope tries to tell her husband, Thomas, how she's feeling and talks about needing to leave the Once Yellow House. And he ends up trapping her there in the house. And you also have that added layer in the Once Yellow House of Thomas being a cult leader. But like I said, we're only talking about the connections between the two books today. So I'm not going to dive a lot into the cult section of the Once Yellow House. Finally, both of these works deal with the isolation and restriction experienced by women within domestic settings. The protagonists in each of these works find themselves confined physically, mentally, and emotionally, not only by societal expectations, but also by patriarchal structures within society and within their own individual homes. Both also deal with mental health and subjectivity, where each of these women experience the deterioration of mental health as a result of confinement and the invalidation of their experiences. Both of these stories also challenge traditional representations of women's madness and hysteria by showing the culprit to be patriarchal society, misogyny, and their own husbands. The house, as a metaphor, is seen in both of them as a symbol of women's trapped identities and the oppressive nature that sometimes takes place in domestic life. And each of these works uses the color yellow to represent a dichotomous nature of life and joy, but instead we find within the home decay, despair, and madness. So, this has been a short video essay about the theme of the oppressive domestic sphere in Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper and Gemma Amor's The Once Yellow House. This is not a video that I've done before. And if you like this kind of video, please let me know and I will make more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you very, very much. I would also appreciate it if you would hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss a video from me. Thank you so much again for watching. Bye.